You knew I was coming for you, little one, when the kettle jumped into the fire. Towels flapped on the hooks, and the dogs crept off, groaning, to the deepest part of the woods. This is Carolina Haints. Welcome, dear listener, to a special Halloween episode of the Carolina Haints Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Sellers. Come with me as we go west, deep into Appalachia, and back to a time when the Cherokee were the sole inhabitants of the land. Back in a time when there was no boundary between what we now know as North Carolina and Tennessee. Cherokee villages and families functioned much like any other community. There were hunters, warriors, medicine men, and of course there were mothers and children. Solali was a rambunctious 8-year-old girl and was well known throughout the village as being fast and daring. As with most kids of this nature, this tended to get her into trouble. Solali would run wild throughout the camps, sometimes on all fours, imitating her favorite creatures. Oftentimes she would run so hard she wouldn't look up until she was slamming into another person. Solali's mother had her hands full raising other children as well, but tried hard to tame her precocious daughter, knowing she couldn't always be watching over her, and with her proclivity to go aimlessly wandering in the woods by herself. Solali's mother told her the story of the dreaded Spearfinger. She may have exaggerated a little to make an impression on her daughter. She told Solali that Spearfinger loved to find children alone in the forest and rip out their guts and eat them raw. She described Spearfinger as a hideous ogre dressed in the skins of her victims. Thinking this word of caution would keep Solali out of the woods altogether, she told her daughter about this hideous creature one night in front of the campfire. Of course, Solali was horrified and dreamed nightmares all night. But did it deter Solali from venturing out into the woods alone? Of course not. Being an adventurous little beast herself and the fastest kid in the whole village, she knew that she would be able to outrun any mountain monster long before they could get the drop on her. It was the following week that Solali was chasing butterflies that she spotted a white squirrel just at the edge of the wood line. Without giving it a second thought, Solali gave chase to the animal. White squirrels were very unusual, and she thought this would make a wonderful prize to show off to the village. But the squirrel was faster than Solali. It led her deeper and deeper into the woods. Eventually, Solali ran until she hit water. She was confused. She knew the nearby stream which fed into the Hiawassee River, but this was a different stream. The water moved rapidly between giant boulders. A large mass of rock in the ground created something close to a natural bridge. She was struggling to gather her bearings when she heard a soft voice call out to her from across the water.
Come here, child.
Solali looked up to see the image of a little old woman wearing rags and hunched over the water. She appeared to be searching for something on the rock.
Come here, child,
the old woman gently said, barely audible over the flowing waters. Solali's initial response was to run away. The woman was strange looking and appeared to be a bit sickly. Just as Solali began to turn away, the woman stumbled a bit and almost fell into the flowing waters. Solali didn't think but leapt forward onto the rocks. She didn't want the old woman to fall into the water after all. As she got closer, she could see the woman's sharp eyes that almost seemed to pierce through her. She hesitated a bit.
Come to me. I've got something you want,
the old woman said. Solali's instincts were telling her to run. She even thought about the Spearfinger she was warned of by her mother. But the old woman reminded her of her grandmother who died last year, and she thought she wouldn't want her grandmother to get hurt trying to cross the river alone. She decided to be brave and came closer and closer to the old woman. As she approached, Solali could see her more clearly, and the dirty old rags she wore appeared more like layers of rock. There was something about the old woman that gave Solali the creeps, but she couldn't quite put a finger on it. The woman's hands were underneath her shawl, and as Solali got even closer, the woman showed her left hand, which was holding the white squirrel. It was sitting still in the woman's grasp.
Is this what you want?
The old woman asked while motioning for Solali to come closer. Solali had never seen a living squirrel so docile. She assumed the squirrel was the old woman's pet and eventually got close enough to touch it.
Can I pet your squirrel?
She asked. The old woman silently held the squirrel out with her left hand, grasping it between her fingers. As Solali slowly placed her little hand on the back of the squirrel, the old woman took her sharp fingers and squeezed the tiny animal. Solali was shocked and horrified. Blood flowed between the old woman's fingers, and Solali could hear the crunch of the tiny animal's bones. That's when Solali felt something wet trickling down her leg. She looked down, and the old woman's right finger was sticking inside of Solali's body. A small trickle of blood had worked its way down. Solali was frozen in shock and didn't feel any pain until the old woman began twisting and turning her long index finger around in Solali's guts. Solali and the old woman made eye contact, and as the look of recognition washed over Solali's face, the old woman began to laugh. It was a horrible, skin-crawling cackle. Then Solali looked down to see the old woman pull the finger back out. But it wasn't an ordinary finger. It was a long, black, stick-like appendage with a sharp tip on the end like a spear. On the end of the woman's sharp finger was a small, brown piece of something shiny. Just as Solali began to scream, the old woman shoved Solali's liver into her mouth, her sharp, disgusting teeth ripping it apart right in front of her as she continued to cackle. Solali ran away as fast as she could. Being so terribly injured, she couldn't run as fast as she normally would, but she knew she was putting good distance between her and the witch. She made it to the other side of the bank and ran up the same path she took getting down, only to look back and see the old woman on the same bank with her. The witch was still laughing and still eating. Solali kept running, holding the small puncture at her side. As she made it through the woods to some familiar landmarks, she knew she was getting closer to the village. She looked back, and still the decrepit old woman, eating her liver, was standing just a stone's throw away. Eventually, Solali made it back to her mother and collapsed in her arms. She was deathly pale and had lost a great deal of blood. Her mother screamed and in a panic asked what had happened to her. Solali whispered,
Spearfinger.
before her eyes rolled back into her head, and her spirit had left her little body, gone to be with her ancestors. Slollie's mother screamed and cried as she rocked her daughter's lifeless body, knowing that she didn't tell her daughter the full story of the dreaded Spearfinger. She had told her daughter that Spearfinger was a monster who preyed on the innocent and stabbed them with her long, knife-like finger. But what she didn't warn her was that Spearfinger was a wolf in sheep's clothing. The hideous monster could disguise itself as a harmless and fragile old woman, thus gaining the trust of her victims. She was trying to scare her daughter into not going into the woods, but instead she should have warned her to be wary of strangers. Even frail, old women who look like your grandmother can conceal a dangerous weapon and entice you to your doom. Pretty creepy, right? This story is exemplary of how Spearfinger was said to have commonly stalked and consumed her victims. But much like the Navajo skinwalker, it's also said that she can change her shape to suit her needs, that she could shift into whatever it took to get her victim close. It sounds to me that Spearfinger perhaps took some sick pleasure in luring her victims to their demise. She could have chased them down and viciously attacked them, but rather, she took her time, gaining their trust, posing as someone helpless and harmless. Once you were close and your guard was down, she would silently strike, and then it was too late. Some Spearfinger victims were even believed to have had their livers extracted without their knowledge, only to die days later. Known to the Cherokee as Utlunta, or the one with the pointed spear, Spearfinger is the witch known to inhabit a peculiar spot on a trail near the infamous Road to Nowhere in Swain County, near the Tennessee border. Back in the 1940s, the land was used to create the Fontana Dam and its reservoir lake, which in turn provided electricity for an Alcoa aluminum plant and the nearby Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which worked to develop and manufacture the first nuclear weapons for the Manhattan Project. But like so many man-made lakes, the land chosen for this massive undertaking was the home of many mountain folk who were displaced. Highway 288 was completely submerged, and folks had no way to safely travel back to the area to visit their family burial grounds. So the federal government began construction on Lakeview Drive, which culminated in a large tunnel about a half-dozen miles into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Eventually, the project ran out of money, and all work came to a halt, cutting off the former residents from being able to traverse Lakeview Drive. Folks in the area took to calling the infamous road project and its massive tunnel the Road to Nowhere. But there's another, perhaps more ominous reason why the project was abandoned. Maybe the Truman administration realized it was better to cut your losses and lose millions of dollars rather than to lose more and more visitors to the darkness that awaits in those hills. Spearfinger is also said to haunt Whiteside Mountain between Cashers and Highlands. Others say that she inhabits the trail between Chiloe Mountain and the Nantahala and Little Tennessee rivers. Legends surrounding Spearfinger are numerous and go from her construction of the Great Rock Bridge to her battles with her enemy, the Stone Man, to her death at the hands of Cherokee warriors and the naming of the chickadee bird as the Truth Teller. But there's plenty of folks who believe that Spearfinger is still haunting the hills today. Even recently, I've heard tales of Cherokee tour guides who refuse to take hikers to certain areas for fear of the evil witch with the spear-like finger. This special Halloween episode was researched and written by me, Dan Sellers. This podcast was produced by Recap Productions, a small film and media company. You can follow us on social media or check out our website at recapitproductions.com.
It's a dark night.
This episode was also brought to you by Carolina Haints Incorporated, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting folklore storytelling throughout the Carolinas. If you'd like to contribute to this podcast and our many projects in the works, please check out our Patreon campaign. For just $10 a month, you can join the team and get access to behind-the-scenes videos and so much more. Just visit patreon.com/Carolina Haints. You can keep up with everything we're up to, including upcoming speaking engagements, Legends and Lore historical markers, and the Carolina Haints book, simply by following us on Facebook and Instagram, or by checking out our website, carolinahaints.com. We hope you have a safe and happy Halloween. Take time to breathe in the chilly autumn air. Sit around a campfire, eat some candy, and of course, tell some spooky ghost stories of your own. We'll return with a new episode of Carolina Haints Presents Folk next week. Tune in then to keep the folklore tradition of oral storytelling alive.